Throughout the years at Aperture Science, the company developed and constructed the most interesting pieces of technology, each one with the ability to make great change to the world. Even after the Combine Empire conquered the world, the robots of Aperture continued to work on testing new developments. One of these was the Cooperative Testing Initiative. In this program, 2 robots were created to fulfill the needs of a murderous artificial intelligence that just wanted to test. How advanced were these robots? How did their actions affect the future of Aperture? And how does their story end? Here we explore in the lore and story behind Alyx and PBody. Deep underground in Upper Michigan, the employees of Aperture Science worked hard to develop, construct, and test advanced pieces of technology where they became one of the leaders of scientific innovation on planet Earth. Although these discoveries initially gave them great acclaim, their fall came when they developed GLaDOS. After this hostile artificial intelligence was given access to neurotoxin, she took control of the Aperture Science Facility and murdered the personnel within. Following on from this massacre, GLaDOS began a testing cycle where she worked through the human test subjects that had come in to test one of Aperture's most promising developments, the Aperture handheld portal device. Over time, these subjects fell, one by one, to the dangers of the test chambers, until one of them, Chell, managed to escape her testing track and took down the murderous robot. Over an unspecified amount of time, the facility lay dormant, where the systems within completed the smallest tasks to keep Aperture running as nature took back the facility. Then, suddenly, GLaDOS was awake again. In this moment, she recaptured the test subject that had murdered her and set her to begin a new testing cycle. With a newfound insight into the destructive nature of humanity, GLaDOS looked for a new way to complete her tests without human interference. Having regained control of her facility, GLaDOS sought a way to fulfill her testing needs without the unpredictable nature of humanity getting in the way. She enjoyed the fear that she had instilled in her human test subjects, but Chell had murdered her and it could happen again. So, she designed a new testing initiative that she could control completely. Her previous test subjects had only been aware of the single-person test chambers, but in the past, Aperture had also created chambers for 2 participants. So, under the belief that she could control robots more than humans, she developed 2 new test subjects. They would not know pride or fear. They would not know anything, only testing. In construction, GLaDOS designed her first robot around a personality core with a blue eye. As she designed him, she took parts and scraps from the facility to build around his large center, where many supports were put in place to facilitate the weight imbalance. Although he was designed to essentially replace human test subjects, GLaDOS understood that Aperture's test chambers had been constructed with human test subjects in mind, so she designed him in part to resemble the human structure with arms and legs. After completion, he was named Alyx. Sometime later, after the completion of Alyx, GLaDOS got to work on his testing partner, PBody. Going for something different this time, the robot decided to design PBody around a sentry turret. It should be noted that each of these robots' cores were formerly used in scientific calculators, just showing how pulled together from scraps they were. After adding robotic arms and legs, GLaDOS completed the design of PBody's armor with orange marks to complement her orange eye. It is known that Alyx was designed and created well before his counterpart, but it is unknown just how much time passed between these 2 events. Their designs clearly showing this in Alyx's almost clunky and dated design compared to PBody's streamlined and futuristic approach. As Alyx and PBody would be expected to work together in order to complete the test chambers of Aperture, GLaDOS gave each a personality, characteristics, and traits, all very different from one another. This added to her almost human design of them, where their artificial intelligence could adapt and grow depending on the situations they found themselves in. The robots also had the ability to control their limbs even when disconnected from their bodies, something that would come in handy during their exploration of Aperture and its test chambers, and something that would help in growing a bond between the two. With testing, it came with its own dangers, but Aperture had technology far beyond its competitors, or old competitors, now that the world outside had fallen to the Combine Empire. If a mistake by the duo led to the destruction of one or both of the robots, a reassembly machine was designed to easily recreate them just as they were before their destruction, with their memories included, which suggests their data was either stored externally or constantly uploaded to a network. Due to their ability to be reconstructed indefinitely after a failure, they could adapt, learn, and grow from their mistakes. This machine was not only used to, in a sense, bring them back to life, but it was also used as a beginning and end of every test chamber, constructing and deconstructing for easy transport to the next task. After construction, the duo went through a series of exercises before even entering a test chamber for their true purpose. One of these many tests was a series of regimented trust exercises in order to create a bond of mutual respect. To do this, GLaDOS initially simulated the bonds of artificial friendship, where she hoped this would grow naturally and improve their ability to complete test chambers. The humans that had previously attempted some of these chambers had failed them due to their lack of trust in one another, resulting in their permanent human deaths. Following these exercises, it was found that Alyx and PBody were more likely to offer an average of 6 seconds of extra cooperation, which would have likely increased over time as their AI evolved. In terms of communication, the duo were given limited speech, leaving them only the ability to make noises, but they would also go on to use their bodies and hands to perform various human gestures such as hugging, high-fiving, and many others as their relationship grew. With their AI set up and prepared to test, the robots were also put through the Aperture Science Collaborative Disposition Test, where it determined that Alyx's personality and character traits were predominantly brave and fearless, which would come in handy in his role in the Cooperative Testing Initiative, while PBody was designated to be inquisitive and sensitive, which would complement Alyx's desire to take on any challenge, with PBody's observation and assessment of the task to hand. It could be inferred that the Aperture Science Collaborative Disposition Test is not entirely accurate, as later events and actions by the robots would contradict their initial assessment, even showing that each had the traits designed to the other. This could have merely been down to the Aperture Science Collaborative Disposition Test being inaccurate, or the robot's AI had changed as they adapted to their environment and tests. Regardless, their core traits of trust and friendship would remain intact throughout, mostly. Now, these tests that Alyx and PBody had been constructed to complete required the use of the Aperture handheld portal device, and with these chambers having cooperation in mind, they each got their own. Mirroring their base colours, Alyx's gun allowed him to form blue and purple portals, while PBody's gun allowed her to form yellow and red. These different colours allowed them to differentiate who owned which portal, where they could complete the test chambers with only the confusion designed by GLaDOS. With their design complete, AI ready to learn, and portal guns at the ready, GLaDOS just had to capture Chell, who was running around the facility causing havoc, and murder her so that the robots could begin their indefinite testing cycle. But Chell would get in the way of her plans. After arriving at her central AI chamber, Chell managed to transfer GLaDOS's core with another personality core, Wheatley. Although Chell believed this would allow her to leave the facility, Wheatley instead went mad with power and transferred GLaDOS into a potato battery and sent them both into the forgotten parts of Aperture. As a result of this, Alyx and PBody would have to wait a little longer to be put to work. Over Wheatley's reign of the Aperture Science Facility, he caught up with Chell and set her to test, just like GLaDOS had. Over this time, he also found Chell too difficult to control and sought a way to have test chambers completed without her interference. Then, he discovered Alyx and PBody, and with it, GLaDOS's plans for the Cooperative Testing Initiative. As Wheatley tested Chell, he prepared for his next cycle of testing, where he allowed the robots to roam the facility, likely observing what they could actually do. On a similar path to GLaDOS, Wheatley decided to murder Chell and replace her with Alyx and PBody. But a final battle in his lair led to GLaDOS once again taking control of the facility, and Wheatley left out in space. Back in control of the facility, GLaDOS allowed Chell safe passage out of Aperture, where she could meddle no more. With Wheatley and Chell gone, GLaDOS officially began the Cooperative Testing Initiative after a long time of waiting. Now, Alyx and PBody could shine. As new test subjects, GLaDOS treated them as such, where she called Alyx blue and PBody orange. She had developed these robots, and so it is unknown why she referred to them by their colors instead of their names. Over their time of testing, the robots followed GLaDOS's orders and successfully completed the many test chambers that the humans had failed. These test chambers brought GLaDOS the success she needed, and it also advanced Alyx's and PBody's AI and relationship with one another. Over time, they would hug, high-five, and interact in various ways deemed very similar to human contact. But this form of affection would frustrate GLaDOS. Each set of test chambers they completed focused mainly on one test type, from lasers to funnels to light bridges, each one training them in how to master each obstacle. Not only did the chambers test the robots, but GLaDOS also found amusement in attempting to manipulate them, where she would speak to each of them individually and attempt to turn them against each other. But they had been programmed to trust each other, and her attempts failed, where she determined that they simply lacked the ability to turn against each other and stayed loyal throughout. After many chambers, GLaDOS began to get bored with testing robots. It was not the same as testing humans, whose emotions were easier to manipulate, and death was final with their kind. The robots were smart, and they could easily just be reassembled after a failed attempt. Although GLaDOS had control over Aperture, there were still parts outside of her reach. The duo had been learning and growing over this time, and so, taking advantage of them, she sent them to regions just outside of the test chambers so that they could locate discs. These discs, when combined, contained information on a location outside of her control. After acquiring the discs for GLaDOS, she learned of a place that had been hidden from her by the last human personnel of the facility before her takeover. These people had died attempting to protect the secret. A human vault, a place where the remaining human test subjects had been held indefinitely in stasis chambers, free from her horrific testing. With this information, GLaDOS sent Alyx and PBody, where they used the skills they had developed over their time of testing and evaded the obstacles and sentry turrets standing guard of the vault. Then, they discovered a final locking mechanism that a survivor had programmed the vault door with. It appeared that an unknown survivor had thought it best to create a locking mechanism that only a humanoid capable of performing human gestures could open. But, to GLaDOS's luck, her robots had shown these abilities too. Happy and willing to complete their task at hand, Alyx and PBody completed a human gesture in front of the door and tricked it into believing they were human. As they entered the vault, they observed hundreds of human test subjects. These humans had been here for many years over the changes that Aperture had gone through. Although GLaDOS had developed her robots to continue testing without the hassle of human interference, she had found that while Alyx and PBody completed her chambers effectively, they lacked the natural human abilities that she had grown to miss. Their fear, her ability to manipulate them, and their ability to actually succumb to their wounds. With new human subjects to test, GLaDOS thanked her 2 loyal robots for their work and set them to self-destruct. Then, everything went dark. Within the reassembly machine, Alyx and PBody found themselves having been reconstructed by GLaDOS. She told them that it had been 100,000 years since they had discovered the human bolt, and that testing was now merely a form of art. In reality, it had only been a week, and in this time, GLaDOS had attempted to turn the humans into killing machines where they had all died in the process, leaving her to fall back on her robots. She wanted human subjects for their mortality, but it was a double-edged sword. Back into the testing cycle, the robots followed her orders like they had done before she had replaced them with the humans. In an older part of the facility, GLaDOS felt something off. Something was overriding her control of Aperture, so she sent Alyx and PBody to investigate. Once again, using the skills they had learned over their time of testing, they navigated Aperture and were sent to a control room outside of the standard testing region to find out what was disrupting GLaDOS's control. After entering the control room, the robots discovered a bird's nest set up in an old chassis of GLaDOS. The bird had created a home here, and fearful of birds, GLaDOS asked her duo to escape before the bird attacked. Showing his brave and fearless nature, Alyx went against GLaDOS's orders and walked towards the bird, ready to strike. In response, the bird fled the facility where it left the chassis free. Although the bird had fled, it left her eggs in the nest, where GLaDOS would later go on to raise them as her own little killing machines. With GLaDOS preoccupied with her new little killing machines, it is unknown what happened to Alyx and PBody. It is likely that they simply continued to test under the watchful eye of GLaDOS, and without the human limitation of aging and mutilation, they would simply continue to grow their relationship as they tested together. As the history of Aperture has shown so far, it is also likely that new threats would arise in the facility, and as always, GLaDOS would be ready with her 2 robots, prepared for another adventure. Now for some behind the scenes information. We all know and love Alyx and PBody, but for Valve's initial vision for the co-op for Portal 2, they had originally planned the characters to be Chell, who we all played as during the campaign, and another character called Mel. Interestingly, although Mel was removed, her legacy lived on in a popular Portal fan game, Portal Stories Mel. It's an amazing game. If you haven't played it, I would highly recommend it. It's free on Steam as well. Anyway, the issue Valve had was that they needed a way to explain respawning after failure, where it still made sense in the story. So, the robots were brought in with the robot assembly machine to recreate them. Following this decision, designing the characters began, and here, we can see the variations and design choices Valve went through. Originally, they were to be 2 identical robots, but with wanting to add a style to them, they went for 2 different robots. In terms of design, some were more human than others, and even one with red lenses. As we know, it takes time to perfect a vision, and eventually we got the Alyx and PBody we love. Alyx and PBody were the perfect characters to play as during my initial playthrough of the Portal 2 co-op campaign. I have played through the whole thing many times over the years with my younger sister, where we would mostly kill each other. Although they were new characters in the series back then, they fit in perfectly with Portal's quirkiness, and I am glad Mel did not work out. Robots doing tests in Aperture just makes sense. This is where we come to the end of this story. If you enjoyed this episode, hit that like button, and if you have not subscribed already, then go and do that. It's a part of the test. Extra testing points if you hit that notification bell. I would like to thank my patrons and channel members who are on the screen right now, and an extra special thank you to my gold tier patrons and channel members: Jonas, Lewis, Queen Arby, Fluffy the Dragon, Mr. M791, and Ruben Mendoza. What did you think of this lore? Which robot did you prefer? And what lore video would you like to see next? Let me know in the comments below. Now test subject, enjoy your day. Bye.